Joe Nucci, welcome to the Coupley Relationship Advice Podcast.
Thanks, Tim. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. Guys, if you haven't heard or seen Joe before, please check him out at Joe Nucci Therapy on Instagram, www.joenuccitherapy.com. And I've got those in the show notes below because Joe does a lot of very, very cool things on socials, therapist versus meme, and tons of takes, hot takes, especially on mental health myths, which we're going to get into today. And this might piss a lot of people off.
We'll see. It's funny. Uh, Sometimes I think that people think that my content is contrarian or spicy or hot takes because of the attention or because of there's this other reason. But the truth is, most therapists, the vast majority of them who see my content, and these are people that I work with or just therapists on the internet, most of them are just kind of like, what you're saying is completely reasonable. It is not us who are being it's not us who is being unreasonable. It's actually the way the culture has talked about these things, and that's been the inspiration for continuing a lot of the work. I will admit, I will intentionally do a spicy hook or kind of frame it in a spicy way, because that's the game we're playing, obviously, all for attention. But in the core of what I talk about, I don't know if it's that contrarian. And maybe that's just a hot take right there. I don't know.
I mean, this is why it's so fun because we're going through this process of the therapization of the world. Everyone is getting into this. Everyone is becoming their own mini therapist inside themselves. And with that, you've got a lot of super uneducated people really going for it on the internet. And sometimes these things just don't connect to reality. And as someone who is also learning a lot about this and putting it on the internet. I really like your stuff, Joe, because I just always think it's so good for taking us back down to some kind of a baseline because people are
Mhm.
starting to run away with the fairies. So we're going to go through 10 mental health myths today, and it's going to be a fun one.
All right, let's do it.
Number one, the neurodivergent label versus normal variance. What do you mean by this?
So let's start off by defining what neurodivergence is. As people have heard it, it can mean ADHD, autism, or what we might refer to in the DSM-5 as a neurodevelopmental disorder. And if you talk to someone who is very passionate about the neurodivergent label, they may correct you, as they've corrected me in many of the comment sections, and explain that it's not just referring to a certain classifications of disorders in the DSM. It's actually referring to a different way of looking at the human nervous system. And my relationship to it, philosophically at least, is complex because on one hand, I do think we need to embrace the idea that different people have a variety of different nervous systems. But what I often see, both in my life, both on the internet and within popular culture, is people will cite neurodivergency as a reason to not do something. The reason I can't clean my house, the reason I can't work like other people work. And I want to say that if that's something that you're struggling with, it could be a good idea to talk to a therapist, particularly one who works with what we're calling neurodivergency or these types of disorders. Whatever school of thought you come from doesn't make much difference to me. The reason I started making content about it is because people were taking things like hyperfocus, which is a aspect of having ADHD, it's dysregulated attention, and saying things like, well, if you find it really easy to focus on video games, but you find it really difficult to focus on other things, this could be a sign. And I mean, look, sure, you could be. I'm not saying that you're not, but the way people took to the label and the way people, in my opinion, have seemed to use the label as a reason to not do things is really where I started to have a philosophical and cultural problem with it. Am I anti neurodivergence in the way the movement, quote unquote, is defined. I wouldn't say I'm anti or pro. I'm trying to be thoughtful about it as a clinician and as someone who has ADHD. I don't identify personally with what a lot of people, at least that I see in comment sections and on the internet, seem to be uh, disclaiming and seem to be kind of speaking on behalf of everyone for it. In my opinion, my relationship and my journey with ADHD has been one in which I've learned the tools and skills and medication that allows me to not feel affected by it. I do believe I have a more mild to moderate case than other people, and so that certainly helps. But when people say, I'm not fill in the blank because I have this, for me, I'm sitting here and I'm saying, well, you could be both. You can have ADHD, you can be neurodivergent, and you can be a super productive individual or a super creative individual or not. I've known and have treated patients who have a variety of different labels that they identify with, and some of them are pretty lazy and some of them are pretty productive. It's all human behavior, and understanding and properly and sufficiently analyzing someone is typically a little bit more complex and nuanced than a 90-second clip is going to have.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so part of my clips and part of my contribution within short form content has been actually just adding a little bit of that nuance and saying, well, listen, it could be both. It could be neither. This doesn't necessarily mean this or that. And there are also, personally, there's just a lot of philosophical contradictions that people who identify with what they might call the neurodivergent movement that I have some questions about. And I don't think that makes me against them or for or against anything to ask those questions. I think it's an important conversation to have. And I would argue, actually, and this is the last thing I'll say on this little rant, that if you actually care about designing a society that makes room for all types of nervous systems, you should actually want to have this back and forth. You should be wanting to get very precise. So,
Whereas most people don't. And a lot of people, I think, you're watching short memes on the internet, you're hearing the clip like, hey, can you focus on video games really well? Can you play video games for hours? That's because you have ADHD. No, it's because video games are fucking awesome and it's amazing to play them for hours and hours because they've got graphics and you can level up and it feels like you're making progress when in your miserable life it takes so long to make progress and it's so annoying to make progress when in one evening of a video game you can actually do something.
absolutely. It reminds me, I believe he's a philosopher. Jason Silva has this very funny quote where he says, nowadays, if you don't have ADHD, it's because you're not paying attention. And what he's referring to, it's the attention economy. And am I really hyper focusing if I doom scroll for 2 hours before bed? Is that a symptom of my ADHD? Or is that something that I know most people are
Mm,
struggling with, given the
mm.
technology that's available?
Yeah, and how addictive that we've created it as well. I definitely noticed that when we were testing TikTok. TikTok was fascinating to test. So the way that TikTok worked when we were testing it, I haven't created a new account in a while, but essentially every 10 reels, there'd be just a splash of nudity. So it'd be someone twerking or someone
Mm,
flexing in a mirror. It was something very much so to grab that attention because you're playing in that roulette. So this little
hmm.
gacha game where it's very addictive because the more that you scroll, the more likely you are to see something a little bit naughty, but you're seeing it innocently and you're just watching. The algorithm is giving you the videos. You're not
Yeah.
typing in anything. You're not typing twerking in. It's just showing up. And how TikTok works is the more you
Yeah,
get. So
totally.
it is incredibly addictive. And just because you scroll a lot on your phone might mean that you have ADHD, but it also might mean that they just got you. Here's the
Hmm.
next one. Your ex is definitely a narcissist.
Yeah, so I think that the awareness around narcissism has a positive effect because narcissists are real and all psychopaths or sociopaths are narcissistic by definition. Not every narcissistic person is sociopathic. That's a
Mm-hmm.
really important distinction. I believe that everyone should understand. But there seems to have been this trend in which anytime someone has been horrible to you, that must mean that they're a narcissist. And one of the reasons I started speaking out about this is because I noticed, even before content creation was even an idea I had in my head, I noticed that I was starting to label people in my life like that.
Mm,
And like internally, I would have these
mm,
thoughts of like, oh, like, is that narcissistic behavior? Or were they just gaslighting me? Or is that's a little abusive? And I
yeah.
was thinking about my thoughts because I do that a lot, being a therapist. And I was wondering, if I feel the allure, what's the average
Mm,
person supposed to do? The person that is not a therapist, the person that doesn't work in this field, the person that just likes this content. And there's nothing wrong with liking this content. And the thing I talk a lot about is, listen, there is a difference between being a narcissist and being selfish, the difference between having narcissistic personality disorder and having narcissistic traits. So one narcissistic trait, for an example, is believing that you should only associate with special people, maybe very powerful people or really good looking people or really wealthy people or whatever it is. Well, I don't know about all of you, but I know a lot of people that like to associate with special people. Does that make them narcissistic? Well, are there other traits? Most children, most teenagers are pretty egotistical by
mhm.
nature. Are they narcissistic? you know, Something I talk about all the time in my content, I'll probably repeat it on this podcast episode, is remember the conditional logic of it all. If it's a dog, it's a mammal, but if it's a mammal, it's not necessarily a dog. And what that basically means is that if they're a narcissist, they will probably gaslight you. But if they gaslight you, or if they are mean or selfish or grandiose or self-centered or not very empathetic or whatever it might be, that doesn't necessarily make them narcissistic. There are other things that can be wrong with people from a mental health perspective, and not every bad person or bad behavior can be explained by mental health. I come from the school of thought that we're all good and bad, and we're like that naturally. There's not necessarily something disordered about it.
It's another very powerful label that if you cast this upon your ex, you're also kind of protected. Because people ask you, like, oh, what happened with so and so? Oh, you guys broke up. Oh, no, I'm so sorry to hear that. What happened? Well, they were a narcissist.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of scot free. There's no
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden you've got the label. Maybe you're putting yourself in a little bit more of like this place of victim, place of innocence. It's an alluring and attractive card to play versus the other
Sure.
cards that you can play when a
Yeah.
relationship breaks down.
And it's really unfortunate if you take a step back and look at the broader picture of conversations around mental health and stigma, because narcissistic abuse can really deeply and psychologically affect people. I've treated
Mm.
people who have gone through these relationships or in these relationships, and I've also treated people who have come to me and they say, my partner is telling me that I'm a narcissist. Help me understand. And just as a general rule, most of the time, narcissists aren't seeking out therapy to get better. And so that's one clue that the term could be getting
Yeah,
misused. But
yeah,
oftentimes what I find when it's a patient is dealing with that, or a loved one, I find that these terms are also a wonderful appeal to authority, which is, I'm going to use the authority of mental health or the psychological field or the psychological sciences, and I'm going to use that to advance my argument or advance my stance. And the appeal to authority is actually a logical fallacy as far as the study of logic is concerned. And it's mighty alluring, as in the name, but and it's mighty appealing, as is in the name, and it's an alluring tactic. But use it too much, it's a little bit like the boy who cried wolf. If everyone's ex is a narcissist, if every bad person is a narcissist, well, that actually, in my opinion, runs the risk of empowering the real narcissist to be a little bit more, what word am I looking for? To get away with
yeah,
more.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's an interesting way of thinking about it. Quickly on this, what do you think? Where do you think the lines are? When is the ex actually a narcissist?
I think that there's a couple of different schools of thought about this. I think it's the analysis of that, the sufficient analysis of that is probably um, a contextual decision, which
Mm.
I know people hate that because they want the soundbite, but that's my whole field is context dependent.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of a lot of psychotherapy and psychological sciences. And so what I would say is that you could operate from a more, we would call it like a lowercase c conservative school of thought. And it's really, well, is there narcissism causing occupational and social dysfunction? Like they can't actually keep a relationship. They actually have problems at work. Then that's probably more in the classification of narcissistic personality disorder. If you're thinking about more just the colloquial meaning of the term narcissistic, I think you have to be able to check many boxes, not just a few. So, are they grandiose, lacking in empathy, thinking that they can only associate with certain kinds of people, a fixation on being the center of attention, an excessive need for admiration and praise? One way to understand what we mean by excessive is something like this. I feel disappointed if I don't hit a goal with my work, or if I want to date someone or I want to be someone's friend and they don't like me. I feel disappointed, of course. It doesn't send me into a complete and total spiral. So when people talk about the narcissistic rage or that fragility, it's just because you have feelings doesn't necessarily make you fragile, right? And I think
Hmm.
most people that drone on and on about narcissism would actually agree with exactly that. And so understanding that it usually is an extreme manifestation. Just because someone's selfish, well, I would argue that most people are a little selfish, and that's okay. So
Amazing.
yeah.
On the theme of selfishness, oh my God, you're such a people pleaser. Should you kill the people pleaser inside? Or is it okay? Is it nice to be nice?
Yeah. Again, it depends on the severity. If you're walking around saying yes to things you want to say no to, and you're
Yeah.
in relationships you don't want to be in, and your friends, quote unquote friends, only like you because they can boss you around, well, maybe there's actually a clinical concern, and maybe the label of people pleaser actually fits what's going on. And therapy can be very helpful for that. Therapy can build a healthy sense of esteem, teach you assertiveness skills, which is what someone who's a people pleaser needs. On the other end of it, agreeableness is a very normative personality trait. I'm moderately agreeable. I'm very, very high in compassion, according to my personality test scores, which makes sense because I love being a therapist. But I'm very, very low in politeness, and what politeness is
Mm.
defined as, at least in the measures that I've taken, is deferential. Being very deferential to like norms and authority, I want to say it is. So I think that also really explains my content a lot, because I'm like, no, like I do genuinely care very, very deeply. And I'm not just going to go along with things I disagree with. And I believe
Yeah.
that also makes me a fairly effective therapist as well. I believe that a therapist that's too agreeable, that doesn't disagree with anything the patient is saying, I don't think they're doing their patient service personally. All that to say is that agreeable people tend to be more popular than disagreeable people. I believe it was actually a Jordan Peterson clip where he talks about, I don't know if he interviewed or he saw an interview with one of the most disagreeable people that the data set had found. It was like the most disagreeable person in 10,000. And he tells the story about how this person, their job, I believe, was to go into companies, figure out who wasn't pulling their weight, and then like fire like 10% of the workforce. And and Jordan Peterson was like, wow, that's really interesting. How do you manage that stress? Because him being a clinician, even though he has his hot takes, is probably a fairly agreeable person. And I guess this man, the man who fires people for a living, goes, stress me out. I enjoy it. and and you could see where there's benefits to that. If you're a lawyer,
Yeah.
you want your lawyer to be disagreeable. I don't want my lawyer to be super agreeable and be like, okay, I don't want my lawyer to be a people pleaser. But, if those traits are making you a really good lawyer, is that making you a really good partner? Does that make you fun to be around? And so depending on the severity of your people pleasing, I don't necessarily think it's a beautiful and wonderful thing to be other centered. If you're doing it because you believe that they would never be there for you otherwise, well, then maybe that's something to think about. But there's wonderful reasons to be agreeable. They're often very popular and they're very nice to be around, and they make you feel good. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
We've got Alex Date Psych coming on soon, who's done some research around agreeableness and time spent in relationships. And it turns out that agreeable people have longer and I think healthier relationships, but we'll find out in a few weeks because they might just be sticking around in them, even though they're bad because they're so agreeable.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I'm thinking of something my grandfather said to me when I was very young. Whenever my grandma would ask for the remote because she wanted to put on her show, he was just like, always give your partner the remote because it doesn't matter. It's
Yeah.
TV. And that was, I mean, is that people pleasing, or is that his way of showing love? And every relationship is a give or take.
This is one where I felt way more comfortable talking about the narcissist stuff, and then when we go on the people pleasing stuff, I feel like this gets in there with something I'm less secure of myself around. And I'm just thinking of this
Mm,
moment where my friends invited me to something, and I was like, sure. And then the plan changed, and it really did not work for me in any way, shape, or form. And I was
mm.
stood at the door with the door open, being like, this doesn't work for me. They've changed the plans. And then I was trying to I was just stood there completely frozen, being like, I don't want to go, right? Like, why don't I want to go? Am I feeling like I'm going to let everyone down? But I didn't change the plans. They changed the plans. Now this doesn't work. And then I was like, oh, I'll just go. And then I just stopped and was like, no, I'm just going to say no. And I said, I'm sorry, guys, I can't go. And then a few minutes later, they were like, oh, we were going to cancel anyway. And I would have been on the train to meet them an hour and a half away, and they would have freaking canceled. And meanwhile, I'm here having
Yeah.
like a full moment around it. So
Yeah.
just shows.
Totally. And it's so a piece of content I made that was quite popular is I say, think about a lot of these terms through these three layers. There's like the disordered behavior, and then there's this outer layer. And it's like, this is where we could put like neuroticism or neurotic
Mm,
behavior. And then there's a conversation around like self actualizing. Depending on how often you are people pleasing or going along with things you don't want, maybe this is seriously like disordered behavior. Like maybe it's
hmm
dependent personality disorder or something like that. But then there's that other rim where it's like, I have this pattern that sometimes gets me into trouble, but I wouldn't necessarily cite it as an overt clinical concern. It's certainly something that therapy can help with, but so could a lot of things could help with it. Coaching could help with
mm,
it, getting support, identifying the problem could help with it. And then there's this outer layer where if you really want to be into the self-development and the professional development and the transformation and all this stuff, and you want to be the opposite, you want to be a disagreeable person, I don't know if the literature supports changing the agreeableness of your personality that substantially, but I also believe that regardless of what literature says, if you put in enough effort to changing yourself, you can
mm.
over time. And so, but you have to ask what you're giving up,
I love that.
you know? Yeah.
Okay. The cult of trauma versus something from our past. The more you learn about trauma, the more you realize everyone's personality is just a trauma response.
Yeah, so this is probably what I'm most known for. My most viral content has been around trauma or the misuse of trauma or commenting on trauma discourse, as I would term it. And I come from the school of thought, and some therapists will disagree with this, but I come from the school of thought that we can't classify everything bad that happens to us, or not even everything bad that has a long lasting impact on us, as trauma. And we can't do that because I think it completely obscures what PTSD is and how it
Mm,
operates, but it also obscures things like complex trauma. I've treated complex trauma. It is not the same thing as still being affected by something negative in your past. There is a certain symptom cluster and it can be treated. And I think that my theory as to why this has really taken social media by storm is two or three things. So the first thing is that we know that our past affects our present. And we know that trauma is real and that it really affects the nervous system and the brain in profound ways. And so I believe it's, like I alluded to earlier, it's an appeal to authority for people to advance their argument about motherhood or childhood or this, whatever the psychodynamic or the more analytical perspective is, through science. But I don't know if it's necessarily appropriately applied all the time. So that's the first reason, I think. The other reason, I think, is that there's a lot of exciting research about trauma happening right now and coming out all the time. It's sometimes I think of it, it's kind of like what the stress research was doing 20 years ago, but we didn't have social media like we do now, at least 20 years ago. And so, yeah, I think it's one of those things where in 20 years we will move on to this other thing that explains everything. And then the third thing I think, and this one will get me in a little bit of trouble, but I will go ahead and say with you, since that is the theme for today. My field, the majority of my field is women, and the classification of toxic femininity or pathological compassion, etc., needs the story of someone is a helpless victim that needs to be saved. And that is because infants and children are pretty helpless. That story has its place. But to cast all of childhood or all of parenthood or everything like that, I don't think it does it justice. And like I said earlier, I think it at the end of the day will really obscure the truly horrific things that some people go through in their lives, the truly horrific ways. I mean, I couldn't believe it when I first became a therapist. Not that my childhood was perfect, it wasn't, but sitting down hearing certain stories, my thought kept on being, how lucky am I? And I think that if you look at social media or talk to the average person, everyone and their mother has pretty clinically significant trauma, and I don't think that there's any evidence to support that.
Therapeutic language versus emotional intelligence. Saying the right words versus sometimes being a good friend.
Yeah, this is maybe my favorite myth to make content about and try to change people's thinking on, because overall it is a good thing that I think a lot of these terms and mental health awareness has become more ubiquitous in society. There are obviously a lot of benefits to it. I'm not knocking that. I am noticing that in my life, and often my patients who come in to see me will use these terms, and they may even be using the terms correctly, which is really interesting, but they're not necessarily applying them correctly. And so what that basically means, so let's say, I'm trying to think of a really good example. Let's say you know what gaslighting is. And let's
Mm-hmm.
say you start dating someone who it starts to feel a little gaslighty.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to get you to question things that you saw with your own eyes, et cetera. And let's say you're using it appropriately. Well, what often happens a lot is people get into this like analysis hamster wheel where it's something like, well, they're gaslighting and this is why, and this is what they're doing, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, well, actually, the correct application of that observation is to exit the relationship. Because if you, assuming it's being done correctly, what you're saying is that this person is exerting a type of psychological abuse called coercive control over you. And you're sitting there and you're pontificating using all of this therapy speak, but really that's the incorrect application. You need to leave, or you need to draw serious boundaries with this person. If it's an in-law or a parent or whoever it is, and you
Yeah.
can't necessarily cut them off. Maybe you need to cut them off. I don't know. But I often see people use these terms and they kind of have this like posturing of like, I know psychology, and I feel so strongly about this because look, I've made this mistake. Of course I have. You think that when I went to school, I didn't misapply certain terms to my life or to my patients when I started practicing or whatever it is? Of course I did. And as we all start becoming more fluent in this, we have to have that conversation. We have to have that conversation about how do I properly apply this
Right.
awareness.
Right.
So if they're avoidantly attached, let's say, okay, all right. Well, do you know how to then change your relationship to them or engage with them in a different way based on this knowledge? Or are you just sitting there pontificating and analyzing about how their avoidant attachment hurts your feelings? Well, if you're correct, and again, a lot of people don't use that term correctly, but if you're correct and you know that they're avoidantly attached, well, the correct application would be to learn to stop taking some of that behavior personally. It should actually
Mm.
bring more connectedness, more understanding, more communication, more transparency, and more peace, ideally.
And ideally, working towards both of you becoming secure.
Mm-hmm. In theory, yes. Some writers on attachment styles disagree with this. I've seen people's attachment styles change through concentrated effort, and
Yeah.
if you know what your attachment style is, then you can, in theory, take steps to start to correct it.
On on attachment styles, do you have anxious attachment, or does your boyfriend suck?
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about what attachment styles are, because something that comes up for me a lot in my clinical practice, particularly if someone comes in already using the term or if they're learning the term, they'll often observe, but I didn't feel this way in the honeymoon phase at the beginning. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's some chemical reasons for that. There's different hormones that are really powerful at the beginning of a relationship. But also, no matter how much intimacy enhancement has taken place in the first let's say few months of knowing each other, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have become attached. An attachment style is how you navigate your insecurities around intimacy. When you are attached, when you actually there's a connection that is not going to easily be severed, that doesn't necessarily happen after the first few dates. It might if you're someone who really rushes intimacy. I could make some
Mm.
things up in terms of personalities or clinical concerns that might cause someone to get attached very quickly. But for the most part, it doesn't happen until you're actually committed and in it, which brings us to your point, which is the anxiety you're feeling anxious attachment or avoidant attachment? Or are you feeling anxious because they're being hot and cold? Because maybe they love bombed you. That's another fun one, right? Like that does happen to some people. As much as I
Yeah.
criticize the misuse of it, that's a thing. That
Hmm.
genuinely is a
Hmm.
tactic that some people use. And so I would say that there's one question you might explore with your therapist is, it's something I do with my patients. I picked this up from another practitioner. I thought it was brilliant. It's like the 1,000-person test. Okay. Well, if you and I are dating and we've been talking together every day for a
Hmm.
couple of months, and then a couple of days go by and you haven't replied to anything, I think that the vast majority of the 1,000 people would feel anxious feelings and think anxious thoughts, because it's a
Yeah.
it's a departure from the pattern that you're used
Yeah.
to. Is that avoidant? Is that anxious attachment? Not necessarily. It might be. There might be other data points, but that's the thing about a lot of these constructs. They're not like, yeah, have you ever learned about like the classical versus family resemblance categories?
No, tell me more.
So this would actually be an amazing clip. So it's something I should make more content about. So basically, classical categories are something like a triangle. A triangle has three sides and three angles, and those equal 180 degrees. You don't have it, you're not a triangle. End of discussion. Mental health and much of psychology don't do categories that way. They do something like that. I believe it's called family resemblance categories. And so a family resemblance category is something like a color. Blue is a legitimate category, but you go into a paint store, oh my gosh, I mean, you can't even
Hmm.
believe the amount of names for all the different kinds of blue. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many people get tripped up with these terms, is because they sometimes infer that, or mistakenly assume that it's a classical category, but it's not. There's always nuance.
My therapist says, do we need to be in therapy forever? So this comes from people where they are constantly quoting their therapist because they haven't been in therapy for 6 months, a year. They are in it for the long haul, seeing their therapist forever. What do you think about
Mm-hmm.
that, Joe?
Yeah. Some people need to be in therapy forever. Some people need to be on medication forever. If you can afford it and you want to be in therapy for, well, there's a lot of reasons why someone would be in therapy forever, because it's really helpful for you to be able to think out loud and have that objective ear. Or it's, you want a really close relationship with your therapist over the years. So when you do come to them with a problem, they know you really well and they can support you the best. Um, there is a such thing as a self-help junkie. I know I have had that phase in my life. And I'm currently in a phase where, not that I'm not working on myself, but I'm not, into it. I'm not kind of as intense about it as I was in other phases. And I think that those integration periods are really good to make the change that you've made sustainable. Um, I think that what I would say about that is that not everyone needs to. It could certainly benefit. And if you're getting benefit from it, then hell yeah, go for it. You know, one broader societal concern you might have is that if you're in therapy because you like it, not because necessarily you need it, are you taking a spot away from someone who really needs it? And I don't want anyone to feel guilty about staying in therapy because, like I said, if you can, I think you should. But there is that consideration. I believe it's what his name. He wrote Twilight of Insanity and Saving Normal. Alan Francis is someone who has worked on the DSM, and one of his concerns is that as we medicalize more of quote unquote everyday life, we're actually taking away the limited mental health resources from the people who really need it, who really wouldn't get better without a therapist. Sometimes I'm treating people with very legitimate mental illnesses or mental disorders. And sometimes I'm helping people normalize problems of living. And you don't necessarily need therapy for the latter. Where therapy can be very helpful is if you are starting to, let's say, suppress emotions because of problems of living. You've had some bad luck in the dating department and you're just
Mm.
heartbreak, heartbreak, heartbreak. You stop putting yourself out there. You start suppressing how you really feel. Well, emotional suppression is correlated with certain mental illnesses. And so it can be proactive that way. But like every other myth we're diving into, it's not a super binary issue. It's not a super simple issue. There's a lot of thought that I would encourage when making these decisions.
I'm wondering as well if this is something where we tie this in with the loneliness epidemic that we're seeing, and are
Mm,
our therapists just becoming like our best friends that we
mm,
pay for instead?
right. You know, I read a lot of social theory in college, and I believe it was Judith Butler. I want to say it was Judith Butler. It may have been Foucault. It doesn't matter. Some postmodernists. But the point is that they looked at therapy as the modern day confessional. That
Mm.
throughout time, there's been different kind of manifestations of this, and I don't believe they were even necessarily criticizing it. It was just I just thought that commentary was interesting. Um, I do share your concern that you're alluding to, which is more about capitalism, actually. And it's about, well, if we need to pay to have this emotional experience or to have this knowledge passed on to us, when really this is something that in theory could be getting passed down through culture or through families or through education or through whatever it is. I do think about that a little bit, and I you already see that with the mental health conversation creeping into the workplace, into education. I'm not convinced that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it can be a bad thing if your boss at work is expected to know how to navigate a serious mental health concern. I think that should probably be outsourced, is my hunch. When it comes to normative emotional regulation skills, I mean, why not normalize that as far as I'm concerned? I mean, here's the truth. There aren't enough therapists for everyone.
Mm.
And I think
Mm.
that's one of the reasons why mental health is having such a moment on social media. It's there just isn't. And so that's why I'm very pro coach. I'm pro guru. There's obviously problems with those industries, but we need more support. We do. And look, not every medical concern needs the MD. You can go to your PA, and get an antibiotic or get something looked at and then maybe get kicked up the food chain, if you will, if you need a more serious look. I think plenty of people could benefit from coaching, and a properly trained coach should know when it's time to say you need to talk to a licensed professional.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, and I kind of, I always, I always feel like we have to be a little bit careful if we're going to get sucked into something forever, you know?
Mm,
Unless it's something where you truly are like, this is a demon that I have to fight every single day, and I can't fight it by myself. There's no way I'm going to fight it by myself. I
totally.
need professional backup with this thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know. Sometimes I think as well, I'm seeing really interesting stats around just the lack of friends that people have,
Yeah.
and it seems to be going this rise in social media, lack of friends, lack of connecting with our friends, and a real rise in us needing and wanting more
Hmm.
therapy. It's an
Yeah,
interesting thing to think about.
absolutely.
Next one, number 8. We're flying through these, Joe. Is it
Amazing.
love bombing or is it actually love?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what love bombing is. Love bombing is a manipulative tactic in
Mm.
which someone showers you with praise and gifts, and they do this to get you to develop feelings for them quickly. And they're also doing this to learn information about you so they can use it to control you later. Um, it's a tactic that people who are abusive use. And so overall, I think it's a good thing that the word is in the cultural vernacular, let's say.
Mm.
Um, I mean, as someone who has experienced that here and there,
Have
it's
you?
it's a really disarming experience. You know, particularly if you're really attracted to the person and you like them, and then they change. It's like what? Like it's really really disorienting. And so I do think it's good that there's awareness around it. And I am constantly watching people, particularly in my life, a little bit in my practice, use it as a justification to not risk feeling vulnerable. And what I mean by that is, okay, well, what if the person's not love bombing you? What if they really, really like you? You know, they're being vulnerable. You know? I mean, it happens. I mean, I think today's world with dating apps and everything, it's really easy to be like, oh, they met on Hinge or Bumble, and 3 months later they're married, like red flag. But we forget that not that long ago, people would meet however they met and get married just months later. And
Yeah.
sometimes it wouldn't work out and they rush, but sometimes they just lived happily ever after. I mean, that is literally a thing that happens to some people, you know? And
Yeah.
it's, I mean, the truth is I don't know everything there is to know about love, but I know that that happens. I
Yeah.
also know that if you are neurodivergent or if you're
Yeah.
someone that can get hyperfixated just as a general personality trait, you're going to get hyperfixated on your crush. You're maybe not going to quote unquote play it cool, you know? And if everyone plays it cool all the time, well, I dare say we might all just die alone. I mean, someone needs to be the person to make the move and to
Yeah.
follow up and send that text. Somebody has to do it. And
Yeah.
so that is also a thing that happens. I also
Oh.
think about puppy love. I mean, are we really going to say that that 14-year-old, that 20-year-old, the first time they really feel those feelings for someone that, and they're completely unfiltered and have never been hurt before and just go in for it? I mean, we're really going to label that as love bombing? I hope not, you know? Um,
Yeah.
you know, and I would also say too, I mean, I don't know how it is for other people listening. I live in New York City, and the benefit of New York City is there are so many people. And
Mhm.
when it comes to dating, the downside of New York City is there are so many people. And so if it has been my observation that people who err on the side of, you know, don't want to seem overeager, don't want to seem like I'm love bombing, don't want to be too forward, don't want to seem too interested, because then that person will think, oh, they're obsessed with me, or what's wrong with them, or they're love bombing me, or whatever the story is. What you often observe, and because I talk to people about their dating lives in my practice, is people say, you know, I had so much fun and I went round and round and round, and now I'm this age and I feel like I should be settling down. And it's really, really difficult because I haven't actually practiced that vulnerability of putting myself out there or accepting it, letting it in, letting that attention and that admiration in from someone who's really interested in you. And so, I mean, listen, I've had some wonderful single periods. In fact, I'm single right now. I'm not hating on any sort of single lifestyle. I'm more just noticing this about this anxiety around love bombing, which is intimacy is scary. It's scary to be vulnerable. And sometimes I think people use that as a reason to not actually consider whether or not they like the person or whether or not they would like to take the next step. And it goes back to that appeal to authority thing. Well, if they love bomb me, then I don't necessarily have to justify just not liking them even though they're perfectly nice and perfectly attractive and said and did all the right things, I don't have to look inward and ask myself, well, why am I not turned on by that?
Oh
You know?
God, that's a good
Yeah.
point. So someone can be
Yeah.
giving, 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 doing something really thoughtful. Their intentions are
Totally.
genuine and honest, and because you aren't comfortable being loved,
Yeah.
it's easier for you to reject that behavior and their well-meaning advances under this
Mm-hmm.
label versus
Yeah.
looking at yourself and being like, what's happening with me feeling so uncomfortable about receiving this attention? Why don't I just project it onto that
Mm.
person? That's way easier to deal with.
Totally. And I would just like to say, I'm a huge fan of people taking it slow, not rushing,
Mm,
not idealizing that instant attraction you have with the person from the analytical perspective. You're actually projecting an ideal onto them, and they will always fall short of it.
yeah.
All of that needs to be considered. And if you're sitting there and you're saying, I'm single and I don't want to be, and all of these people were too forward, rushed intimacy with me. My question is, well, did you let them know? Did you ask for them to slow down? Because chances are, unless there's something preventing them from meeting that request of yours, if they like you, they're probably going to do it. They're not going to want to scare you away. And if they don't do that perfectly every time, they can't help themselves because they're really into you. That's a pretty good problem to have as far as I'm
Mm,
concerned. So,
hmm. Beautiful.
yeah.
The more intimacy, the better. The
Yeah.
subtitle here, how we can get enmeshed and skip over building long-term trust and instead straight into short-term
Yeah.
intimacy.
One of my more popular videos, I talk about this book called Schopenhauer's Porcupines. And in the book, the porcupine is this metaphor for human intimacy. Basically, porcupines huddle in their little troops and they need each other when storms come because storms come in life. And they get close to each other for warmth, for connection, for help. And the closer they get, the more likely they are to accidentally hurt each other with their quills. And I think it's such a lovely metaphor because that is the dilemma of human intimacy. We want to feel close, but if you feel close to someone, well, they could not give you what you need. That would hurt. Or if they're feeling activated, whether it's their trauma or maybe they're a little narcissistic to refer to earlier, or whatever it is, they could potentially use it against you, if they really knew who you were. And so, yeah, intimacy is scary. And so a lot of people fear intimacy. A lot of people have quote unquote intimacy issues. A lot of people really deeply crave it. Some of those people experience both of those things at the same time.
Mm.
Enmeshment is this family therapy term in which the boundary between two individuals gets really, really blurred. Their different feelings, their values, their interests, almost like everything about their not their personality, but
The
their
being.
being can get enmeshed a little bit. And one way to normalize this is very common with couples at the beginning of the relationship. I don't know if it's honeymoon phase necessarily, because that's more about the desire and the eroticism, but it's more like, yeah, you get really settled in your ways with someone, and we're a we now. Um, it's all about balancing, your individuality with your togetherness. And so the is more intimacy better? It depends. Having a ton of intimacy at the beginning can be super great. I know that in like the retreat model of psychotherapy, people go on these self-help retreats. They often find it really easy to open up with a stranger,
Mm.
But I also know that a lot of these people will sometimes never speak to those people again. The intimacy was manufactured, usually
Yeah.
by the facilitator, who's usually trained in psychology. And a lot of people listening to this may have experienced something. You're in the sharing circle, and it's like, something you don't know about me is something I don't want you to know about me is, wow, I feel really close to you. You know, Not
Yeah.
a bad thing to do necessarily. When it comes to dating, vulnerability, Brene Brown has really popularized being courageous and being vulnerable. And I think that overall that's wonderful. And I believe it's, what's her name? She's such a lovely creator. I made a stitch about this. think her name's like Sarah. It's like Kubrick, or I don't know. I'm mispronouncing her
Mm.
last name. But anyways, she has this. I believe it's her. She has this thing where it's kind of like, yeah, be vulnerable if you can handle it going wrong.
Yeah.
You know? So if
Right.
you're feeling vulnerable, texting someone that you want to see again, what if they never reply? What if they leave you on red? Can you handle it? Okay. You know, if you
Yeah.
can't handle it, well, then maybe that's not a safe level of vulnerability. If sharing about a trauma or something in your past is something you feel called to do, so this person knows a little bit more about you, and it totally freaks them out and they never talk to you again, like, can you handle that? And I don't want people to think about being vulnerable just through that scarcity mindset either, because there's also this reward, the reward that you get to feel seen and known and understood, the reward that they show up for you and they understand you and your complexities in a deeper way. I mean, that's lovely, and that's what a lot of people are after in a relationship. But is more intimacy better? I think it depends on the timeline, and I think it
Yeah.
also depends on the nature of the relationship. Some friends, some of my friends, like, these are my friends I have fun with because we have the same taste in music, and that's my concert buddy, and we have a
Yeah.
great freaking time. They're not necessarily, I'm going to call you in a crisis friend, and you're allowed to have both. And yes, you may have more intimacy, you may be closer to one other person, but in my opinion, that doesn't make the other friend less valuable, because if the person you're really intimately close with doesn't like your taste in music, well, you know what? They're not going to be as much fun to go to the concert with, you know? So, yeah.
I like a lot of what you said, and I think where it gets interesting when I think of couples, relationships, and dating is the timeline, and the timeline, and this
Mm,
craving for connection, the craving to get out all your stuff quickly and to make sure that they're okay with it and share it
yeah.
really fast. Um, I've noticed I've been on the other side of that when you're
Mm-hmm.
on a first date with someone and they're
Yeah.
just like, here are all my things,
Yeah.
and it kind of gets thrown at you, and you're like, I thought we were just having a nice dinner.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I'm really feeling like you should be paying me to have this conversation with you because it's
Yeah.
so intense and
Mm-hmm.
the most unromantic and
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable experience.
Yeah.
But I get it from their perspective because they're like, here are my things anyways. I might as well give it to you all now and see if you can hack it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
it's tricky.
Yeah. It is tricky. And it makes me think of what you said earlier. There is a loneliness epidemic. And I just want to call out and say that I feel very lucky. I have really close personal relationships in my life and people that I can be very real and vulnerable with. And sometimes I think that when you have that, it's easy to overestimate the degree to which other people have that. That person on the
Yeah.
first date, they might be rushing intimacy, but you know what? They might also just be super lonely, scrolling on Instagram, having all these epiphanies. God, they just want to talk to someone about it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Not that they
Yeah.
should or shouldn't do that, because there's intent and then there's impact, but it's just something I think about sometimes. I feel I love being able to have those meaningful conversations for a living. That's essentially what I'm doing in a lot of ways. And sometimes I think I'm almost not numb to it, because that's not true. I'm not numb, but I take it for granted. I take it. It's like, oh well,
Mm.
like like a ton of people are deep, like a ton of people are just attuned to each other or whatever. And I'm often reminded in my personal life, I'll be meeting someone new and I'll say something that I think is just obvious. It's obvious to say this, it's the kind thing to say, or it's just what I feel or whatever it is. And I watch it hit them, and then I'm just like, oh, now you think I'm trying to be a therapist, but I'm not. I'm like being a, can I swear on here? I'm being
Oh
a,
yeah.
I'm being a fucking person. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know who you've been hanging out with
Yeah.
that made this
Yeah.
really special, but that almost makes me a little sad. But I'm glad we're connecting. You know what I mean? It's so
Yeah.
confusing, very swirly.
It's pretty hard being awesome. That's the shorthand of this,
Oh
being
my god.
being a good friend. You're right though, and it's something that I wonder about in terms of how we can help people solve this. I do think that there's I do think that people are facing a lot of loneliness. And I think as well, you're right. This is something that I'm definitely taking for granted, not being lonely. And I think it's
Mm.
because I'm quite a mission based person. And so I find something I'm interested about, and then I'm on a mission. And to help me complete that mission, I want to find interesting people that are on the same mission and
Mm.
doing similar cool things. And then around that becomes some community. And that has always served me so well. Even if I've been working a normal job, I've had personal life hobbies and things that I'm doing that
Mm-hmm.
have always created community, probably combined with a very extroverted personality and a high level of agreeableness and a little bit of um, the thing that we're about to get into as the final myth as well. And that's always led to me to build a little bit of community around the things that I'm passionate about. But there is something that really fucks me off, and it's that I meet so many people that are like, "Oh, you've got so many mates. How did you get so many friends? I want more friends. Awesome. Come and meet my friends. I'm having some people around my house for dinner. Come over. Great." They come over, they meet people, they're like, "This is amazing. Like, I'd really love to see you guys again." Yeah, awesome. Definitely invite the people here or stay in touch. Never get an invitation back. Never hear
Mm-hmm.
from them. And it's not reciprocated. So while
Yeah.
you might host something, bring people together,
Yeah.
and then you don't get invited to anything back, or you don't get, there's no like, to become friends with someone is a simple process of me inviting you to do something cool, you saying yes or no, and then you inviting me to do something cool, me saying yes or no, but us continually offering things to do, even if it's just company, even if it's just say, "Hey, I thought of you, would love to grab a coffee."
Yeah.
And what I've noticed with people that complain about lonely, I'll reach out to them 3, 4 times in a row. They'll say yes, no, yes, no, no, and then never hit me back.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I'm wired similarly to you in terms of personality, and I'm definitely enjoy being a connector amongst friends and just kind of bringing different groups together and stuff. And it's something that, I mean, I don't know. Is it just like adulthood? Like I've just started to kind of accept I'm not going to get perfect reciprocation. And that's
Mm.
okay because that's not the reason I do it. But I do notice, you know,
Yeah.
I do notice
Yeah.
it, you know, and I also think too, the way friendship, um, the dynamic of friendship as an adult is just different than when you're growing up or when you're in college or even when you're in your early 20s. It's probably culture dependent, depends on where you live in the world. But I know that for me, I'm really, really intentional. Like if I have a bunch of people over, I text and DM every single person I met that I liked the next day. And being pretty agreeable, I like, most people that I meet. And it's kind of
Mm.
difficult to make a bad first impression on me. And sometimes it leads somewhere, sometimes it doesn't. But I know that people have reflected back to me. They're like, I want to get better at that. I want
Mm.
to do that more because they recognize it does matter. And it's the reason why I can throw the party or throw the
Mm.
gathering, because I do constantly make that effort. And that effort does take time and energy. If you have a party on Saturday and I'm on the couch on Sunday, I mean, that can be like over an hour of time. I'm just like, boom, 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 shooting it out,
Mm.
and I don't know, maybe if people are busy or stressed or there's just other things going on in their life, maybe they're not thinking about the relationships that way.
Yes, that's so true. Christina
Yeah.
Vero, um, at Therapy Christina, she wrote me a letter and said, "Thank you so much for organizing a dinner." An actual letter to my home.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
It's the classiest thing. And
Yeah.
I just couldn't get over how classy it was. It was so classy. Wow, you're going to get invited to every
Mm.
single thing I do forever because this is such a
Yeah.
thoughtful thing. It's so nice. Like, wow,
Yeah.
I love that. Let's bring that
Yeah.
back. So if you're lonely, write letters, say thank you, show up, and also host some
Yeah.
things. The final
Hmm.
myth:
Yeah.
the pathological compassion. What's this?
Mm. This is a concept I touched on earlier. And essentially, it's the idea that if there's too much validation, nurturance, protection that can actually be bad for you.
Mm.
And so for me, it kind of brings up this idea of like, it's like something akin to like anti-fragility. Like there are some modes of healing and growing where you actually need to get stronger, tougher, and more resilient. And where I see this come up a lot, at least in terms of the mental health conversation, is a lot of people get validated by their therapists for feeling however they're feeling. And that's really, really important, because vast majority of the time, your feelings super freaking valid.
Mm-hmm.
Where we start to see like the pathological compassion is, you could almost think of it as like, well, the mother who, or the parent, because I don't think this is exclusive to mothers by any means, the parent who shields their kids from any sort of kind of hardship, you know. Here's maybe a really great metaphor for it. If your parent intervenes to your teacher every time you don't get an A, even though you don't deserve an A, you're in for a rude awakening in the real
Yeah.
world, right? Like that is
Yeah.
just, I mean, everybody like gets that, because everyone is annoyed that that kid is on, honor roll and they're not, right? And
Yeah.
think of it like that, but think of it for any other kind of therapeutic concern. If there's too much of anything is going to cause problems, and it's kind of weird, because you're like, well, too much compassion, well, what does that mean? Well, you're robbing them of the chance to grow if you're protecting them from feeling bad feelings that they need to feel. So for example, shame can have really adaptive function. If you do something really wrong, if you're like mean to someone, you make a mistake, you mess up, and you're even cruel to someone, let's say, and you feel shame, I mean, congratulations, like you're not a sociopath. It's like, you should feel shameful and guilty for what you did.
Yeah.
The wrong approach to that is, no, don't feel that way. No, you're great, you're perfect. Like, to encourage the behavior that is maladaptive in some way, I don't think is the right approach. And so I talk about this in my content, because I think my content is different from a lot of other creators' content, in the sense that I'm not afraid to be thought provoking. I'm not afraid to be a little contrarian. I'm not afraid to be authentic and just let people know this is really like what I think and feel about X, Y, or Z. And I think the reason it has made a splash, if you will, is because a lot of therapists on social media talk in a very compassionate, empathetic tone.
Mm.
I mean, I talk like that to patients, but if you're my follower, you're not my patient, because this isn't therapy. I know that's in every single therapist disclaimer at the top, but that is actually the case, right? And so that's my little riff on pathological compassion. In just as we kind of wrap up here, some really extreme iterations of that. What's her name in the news? The person that survived Munchausen by proxy. It's now called factitious disorder. What's her name? It's like something Rose.
Oh, I don't know.
Doesn't matter. This Gypsy Rose like got released from prison because she hired someone to kill her mother, who was like making her sick, because she had Munchausen disorder by proxy. So she was making her child sick. And one of the key features of that disorder is that, well, they love feeling needed by the person that they're making
Right.
sick. And so that's a very extreme iteration of pathological compassion, because you talk to someone, and I have to confess, I've never worked with it clinically, but I imagine if you talk to someone who is dealing with Munchausen by proxy, they have pretty low insight into what they're doing is so messed up, because like that compassion to give, like that care, that
Yeah.
nurturance, it's just too good to pass up. And so, it makes you think.
This is the devouring mother archetype, and
Correct.
this idea of being needed so much, but then on the flip side of it is being spurned when you're not needed, which is relates to my
Mm-hmm.
story of throwing parties and then feeling I'm throwing a party that should just be on me. I'm should just be having a good time. I'm just inviting people. That I should be throwing a party with zero expectations, really,
Yeah.
right? But then a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of me is like, whoa, you're not gonna, I'm not gonna hear from you again. You're just
Yeah.
gonna come to like Do you see that there's that little, it's not quite just a selfless act, a little bit of this needing to be needed maybe. And I've noticed me getting the feels when I will get involved in someone's problem and then try and solve it with them,
Mm,
and then they
yeah.
ignore the solutions or take
Right.
my help for granted, and I can feel that little spurning inside, and it
Yeah.
is, I know I've got this in me a little bit, and it's
Yeah.
not good.
Totally. Well, one of the things you learn becoming a therapist when it comes to helping people, and you learn it very quickly, is telling them what to do. Well, go and do this thing, and you will get better. Yeah, maybe it sometimes works, but a lot of times it's much better for them to come to that conclusion on their own. And it feels good, right? It feels good. Like if
Right.
you're my patient, it feels so
Yeah.
good for me to like tell you like what I believe to be the sufficient analysis of the
Yeah.
problem at hand. But then they come back in the next week and the next week, and then they haven't really done anything. Then you have to tackle it from a different angle. And I think that's something that everyone can actually learn from the therapeutic art, because this comes up in relationships, it comes up in parenthood, it comes up in school, at work, you know, and figuring out that balance is tricky, but it's possible. I'm getting better at it the longer I practice.
Joe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
This was an absolute blast. I love spending time with you. Where
Oh,
can
me too.
people discover you? Where can people connect with you?
Yeah. So at Joe Nucci Therapy, that's Nucci, like Gucci with an N. And I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, um, and joenuccitherapy.com as well. And I'll be wherever you get your podcasts. I believe by the time this episode comes out, my podcast with Luminary, Therapy versus the World, will be out, and it'll have a ton of fun conversations. We'll have to have you on at some point.
I'd be honored. Joe, thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining us today.
All right. Thank you.